The roast was still hot when I pulled it from the oven, the steam rising in slow, gentle curls. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen. It always did. I'd added a splash of Harold's favorite red, just like he taught me. The pan sizzled as I set it down on the trivet. My glasses fogged up from the steam, so I wiped them on the hem of my apron, blinking through the blur. I didn't need a timer anymore. My hands knew the rhythm, the basting, the seasoning, the timing. It all moved through me like a song I didn't have to think about. I reached for the carving knife. My fingers hovered a moment, and I thought of him standing beside me saying, "Smells like love in here." But tonight, there was only the soft hum of the ceiling fan above and the faint creak of the floor under my steps. I laid the slices on the platter, garnished it with the sprigs of rosemary he liked. No one would notice, but I did it anyway. I always did. The kitchen light glowed warm around me, but I didn't feel it. I moved by habit, not hope. I turned off the oven. The silence stretched long, and still, I set the table for 5. The candle on the dining table flickered as I lit it. Blue, tall, too proud for a table that sat no one tonight. I'd always loved this one. It reminded me of the night Harold proposed, nervous and sweaty in the middle of a blackout, fumbling with a ring and a flashlight. I watched the flame for a moment, watched how it bent and danced. The lace runner, beneath it, had yellowed over the years, but I still set it out every time. It was soft in a way that made me careful. I placed the candle in the center, straightened it. Lighting it felt like a quiet rebellion, a ritual with no audience, a gesture toward what once was. But the flame, brave as it tried to be, felt lonely tonight. It flickered too fast, like it knew no one else was coming. I pulled the chairs out one by one. It was silly maybe, but I did it anyway. Harold's seat first, the one he always claimed before anyone else could. Then mine, then the others, my sons, my daughter-in-laws, and little Ellie's, even though she never sat still long enough to finish a full plate. I placed the napkins with their initials embroidered in the corners. The silverware clinked, softly as I laid them down. The table looked ready, welcoming, like always. But tonight it felt like a stage waiting for actors who had no intention of showing up. The room was too still, too clean. The cool evening breeze slipped through the screen and brushed against my ankles. I sat. The plate in front of me waited. I cut into the roast. The fork scraped the plate, and in the quiet, it sounded sharp, like something breaking. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I didn't rush to grab it. I already knew. The screen lit up with a photo. Bright sky, sand, all of them, together, smiling, matching shirts, frozen drinks held high, tan lines, happiness. I stared at it, but didn't zoom in, didn't double tap, just watched there. Joy spill across the glass for a few seconds. Then I pressed the side button, locked the screen, and turned it face down. Outside, the neighbors' sprinklers clicked on. The scent of cut grass mingled with the rosemary still wafting from the kitchen. Their laughter reached me, not in sound, but in knowing. I let it pass through me like wind through an open door, something I wasn't meant to hold. The butter. Dish sat untouched at the center of the table. I had set it out early, like always. It needed time to soften, so someone could smile and say, "You remembered the butter." But the curls were still firm, resistant to the warmth that never came. I picked up the knife, tried to spread it on a roll, and watched it crack the bread. Instead, I stared at it a moment, then set it back down. No one would ask. No one would notice. It stayed there, untouched, like me. Still whole, but not needed. I filled my plate with just enough, a slice of roast, 1 potato, 2 carrots, the bread with its broken crust. Not much, but enough for memory. "Don't let a good roast go cold," Harold used to say, rubbing his belly after the first bite. I could still hear it, still see his eyes crinkle when he says it. I took a bite. The meat was tender. The seasoning was just right. I chewed slowly, let the flavor settle. No talking, no laughter. Just the soft hum of insects outside the window and the quiet creak of the ceiling fan above me. I ate for both of us, for years, for the silence. And somehow, the food tasted honest, like truth served warm on a plate meant for 5. The first time we stood on the empty lot, Harold held up the blueprints like they were treasure maps. The edges curled from the wind, and he had to use one knee to pin it down on the hood of the truck. I remember laughing, brushing hair from my face, and squinting at lines I didn't understand. He pointed with the same excitement he used when explaining baseball plays to the kids. "There's the kitchen," he said, tapping the page. "That's where the table'll go. You'll have a view of the backyard from the sink." I smiled. "As long as you build me a porch, you can put the sink wherever you want." Our hands were still soft then, young. But we worked hard, boots muddy, jeans damp at the knees. That spring smelled like wet wood and fresh dirt. I remember the buzz of saws, the sharp scent of pine, the way Harold whistled while hammering. We brought sandwiches in a cooler and sat on overturned paint buckets when we were tired. There was a quiet joy in it, not loud, just steady, like a heartbeat. We weren't just building a house, we were building us. I can still feel the rough edge of the trowel in my hand that day. Harold poured the concrete just behind the porch, smoothed it out with care, and winked at me. "Come on," he said, crouching down, "before it sets." We pressed our hands in first, side by side. Then he etched our initials, and just underneath, he wrote the year and smiled like a boy. "For the grandkids," he said, "so they know we were here." I kissed his cheek, smudging a little dust across his skin. Later we planted rose bushes together, badly. The holes were too shallow, and we argued over the spacing. But we laughed through it, dirt under our nails, sweat on our foreheads. He wiped his brow with my old dish towel and gave me that grin. That always made my knees a little weak, even after the babies. I didn't know then how deep those roots would go. How every bloom would feel like a promise kept. That day, we planted more than roses. We planted a life. Harold believed in teaching. With his hands, he taught the kids how to fix a leaky faucet before they could drive. He showed them how to thread a needle, fold laundry right, and say thank you like they meant it. He didn't shout when things broke. He just said, "Let's learn from it." Sunday dinners, he'd have one of them seasoning the roast. "No measuring spoons," he'd say, guiding their hands over the salt. "You go by heart." He believed money was loud, but values. Values whispered. And so we whispered ours, over dishwater and garden weeds, in bedtime stories and apology notes. That house wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The creaks in the floor, the stains in the carpet, the tiny fixes Harold never got to finish. Each one was a marker of a day lived with intention. Not one of those things is worth $1, but they're worth everything. The night we finally moved in, we didn't even have curtains yet. Just a mattress in the middle of the living room, 2 pizzas from Tony's, and a bottle of cheap wine we drank from jelly jars. The stars peeked, in like old friends through the bare windows. The air smelled like paint and promise. I remember Harold laying back on the mattress and sighing like he'd been carrying the whole sky. "This is it, love," he whispered. "We built something that breathes." I laid beside him, heart full and quiet, and I believed him. I still do. We had this thing, Sunday mornings in pajamas. The kids would pile in, hair messy, pancakes stacked too high. Harold would toss the comics across the table, and I'd pretend not to see syrup on the couch cushions again. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. There was a story in every oil stain, in the driveway, every chipped mug on the shelf, even the squeaky cabinet in the kitchen. Harold meant to fix it for 20 years, and somehow I grew to love that squeak. It was part of the rhythm of home. He'd hum while doing the dishes. Sometimes, off-key, and every now and then, He'd spin me around the linoleum like we were on a ballroom floor. The sink is full of suds, and our hearts full of laughter. We didn't build a dream home. We built a place where dreams didn't need polish to matter. That house was stitched together with a story. The will was simple. Harold never believed in clutter, not even on paper. But what he left behind couldn't be typed on a form. He always said, "Legacy isn't what you leave in the bank, it's what you leave in the room when you're not in it." And he was right. Dust the piano every week, even though no one plays it now. It was his. He taught the kids twinkle twinkle on those keys, taught them how to listen and how to keep tempo. There's still a faint scratch from when Ellie tried to climb, it in her cowboy boots. I never had the heart to fix it. The sun hits the top of it just right in the afternoon. That's when I sit there, cloth in hand, and just pause. It's not about missing him. It's about honoring what he left in me. You won't find that in a will. You'll find it in the way I still smile when I hear his song, even in silence. The stack of mail was waiting on the kitchen table, just like it always was. Grocery ads on top, coupons I'd probably forget to clip. I sorted through it slowly, the way you do when you're not in a rush and not expecting anything important. Then I saw it. A postcard, glossy and bright. Blue water, palm trees, a sky. So clear it almost looked fake. The kind of place you send photos from when you're too happy to remember anything else. It was wedged between a flyer for dental cleaning and a catalog I didn't order. I turned it over. The writing was crooked, like it was done quickly, between poolside cocktails or the breakfast buffet. The postmark was smudged. I couldn't quite make out the date. I held it in both hands, just stood there at the table, hoping it might change if I gave it long enough. Like maybe, if I waited, it would soften. Apologize, say more. But it didn't. I read it again, hoping I missed something the first time, but no. Just wish you were here, followed by a dash and 3 names. No mention of the date, no happy anniversary, no we love you. Not even a scribbled heart or a little joke. It felt like a card you sent to a neighbor or someone you met at a conference once. Not a mother, not family, just someone peripheral. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again, and somehow the sound of it felt louder than the silence on that card. I stared at the message until the words blurred. And then I set it on the table. Like it weighed more than it should. I didn't cry. I just sat very still. Because sometimes it's not what people say, it's what they don't. I don't know why I did it, but I brought the card to my nose. Maybe I was looking for proof that it had traveled far, or maybe I just needed to feel something. It smelled like ink and sunscreen. A hint of sea salt. Maybe. Like the edges had absorbed the air of wherever they'd been, but mostly it smelled like distance, like they were living some shiny, sunlit version of life that didn't have a space for me anymore. And I felt like a little girl again. The one on the edge of the playground, waiting for someone to remember she was there. Only now I was grown, and the ache hadn't gone anywhere. I didn't tear it up. I didn't stick it on the fridge either. Instead, I walked over to the drawer by the sink, the one filled with things nobody really needs but can't quite throw away. I slid the card under a mess of old rubber bands, next to a pen that didn't work, and birthday candles in colors no one's asked for in years. It didn't feel like bitterness, not exactly, more like acceptance. Like that card belonged there, with things that once meant something, but had since stopped being asked for. I stood there a moment longer, hand resting on the edge of the drawer. The wood felt worn, soft at the corners. I closed it slowly, listening to the gentle click as it shut, and just like that, it was out of sight, but not out of mind. The sun through the kitchen window reached my arms. I didn't move. I let it warm me, soft and golden, in the way only morning light knows how to do. It didn't ask questions. It didn't need to be noticed. It just showed up. Quiet and steady. I thought about the beaches they were walking on, the tan lines, the laughter, the way their days probably ran together like watercolor. And then I looked around. My toast was cooling on the plate. The coffee had gone a little lukewarm, but it was mine. This morning, this light, this space. I had it. I didn't need their sun. Mine came slower, quieter, but it was still enough. Out back, the birds kept singing. Their little voices rose and fell in the branches just like they always did, like the world hadn't skipped a beat. And maybe it hadn't. Maybe anniversaries are only sacred when someone remembers to make them so. I took my mug in both hands, wrapped my fingers around it, and just sat at the window. The steam curled up gently. The scent of rosemary floated in from the garden. My breath matched the pace of the birdsong, slow and steady. Even without them, the morning had a rhythm. It had a song. And I was still here to hear it. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and citrus zest, the kind of bright aroma that made you feel awake even before your first sip. She sat across from me, her elbows on the table, her sunglasses pushed up, into her hair like a crown, the kind of woman who always seemed to be in motion, even when she was still. "I mean, Mom," she said, her voice light and full of something I couldn't name. "No one does that anymore." I looked up from my tea. "Does what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Family dinners. Sitting down every Sunday. It's old-fashioned?" She said it with a laugh, like it was a harmless observation, like it wasn't a dismissal. But her eyes didn't smile, and inside, her words landed like cold rain on warm skin. I smiled back, small, polite. But something in me pulled tight, not because I was old-fashioned, because I'd been made to feel obsolete. She picked at her avocado toast like it had offended her. One bite. Then her thumb was back on her phone, scrolling. I watched the toast crumble under her fork, pieces falling apart before they ever really held together. It reminded me of our conversations lately. Quick to break, never finished. Her screen was brighter than my voice, always. I remember when I used to make 3-course meals, salads with homemade dressing, pies that needed lattice tops. I remember setting the table with care, not just forks and knives, but with intention, with love. Now she barely looked up when I spoke. "Did you try the rosemary bread?" I asked gently. "Mm-hmm," she mumbled, eyes still down. "It's fine." I nodded and reached for my tea. The lemon had gone. Bitter. I smiled like I always do. The one that's been practiced over the years, at PTA meetings, funerals, weddings, baby showers. A smile that doesn't ask much and expects even less. But today it felt different. Hollow, bitter. Like something sweet I had kept in a jar for too long and opened too late. I looked at her again. She was so beautiful, so capable, but so far away, even when she was sitting right in front of me. My smile held. I let it. Because that's what mothers do, even when the door they're holding open has already closed behind them. I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to tell her about the nights Harold and I stayed up waiting for them to come home from prom. About the Sunday dinners when her little boy dropped peas under the table and called it a pea parade. About how the sound of family laughter at a table had once filled that girl's world. But the cafe was loud, too loud, dishes clanking, forks tapping, a blender whining somewhere behind us, and she was already back to scrolling. Her eyes flicked across the screen like I wasn't even there, so I stirred my tea. Let the lemon slice bob in circles and let the words go quiet. Some silences I've learned are chosen. Others are handed to you. I didn't feel angry, just tired. Not the kind of tiredness you fix with sleep, but the kind that settles in your bones when something's stretched too far, too long. Something inside me snapped, soft and quiet, like the pop of a wishbone in two hands, pulling in opposite directions. I didn't flinch. I just reached down and held my purse a little tighter in my lap. Not out of fear, not to leave, just to feel the weight of something I still had control over, something that still belonged to me. She was talking about a new show she started. I didn't catch the name. I nodded anyway. Outside, the light shifted. Clouds moved across the window. And I sat still, letting the moment pass through me without taking anything more. When the check came, I reached for it without hesitation. The server smiled, perfume like vanilla and lavender drifting behind her. I thanked her softly and slid my card across the table. She barely looked up. "Thanks, Mom," she said, eyes already back on her screen. The receipt printed with a soft hum, curling at the edges like something trying to disappear. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse. It felt like the last page of a chapter no one else had been reading. Then I smiled again. One more time. But this one, it wasn't for her. It was for me. The sun was slipping low behind the fence when I heard it. That knock. Soft. Familiar. Not rushed like the deliveries or loud like the neighbor boy. Just gentle. Like someone who already knew I was home. I dried my hands on the dish towel, still warm from the oven, and stepped toward the door. When I opened it, there she was. Carol. Her. Hair was thinner now, but her smile hadn't changed. It tugged at something in my chest. This was the woman who used to braid my daughter's hair on school mornings, who brought over casseroles when Harold had surgery. Seeing her there felt like memory itself had climbed my porch steps. "Hi there," she said, as if decades were nothing. "Hope I'm not interrupting." I shook my head and stepped aside. Of course not. The breeze rustled through the hedges behind her. It smelled like barbecue and just watered grass. The kind of evening that makes you pause without meaning to. She cradled the peaches in a faded tea towel, white with blue stitching around the edges, like the ones my mother used to embroider. "Straight off the tree," she said, lifting the corners open to show me. 5 peaches. Blushed and sun-warmed, their fuzz catching the light. I could smell them before I touched them, sweet, almost floral, like they'd ripened on purpose for this exact moment. I reached out to take them, but she held them just a second longer. "I thought maybe you'd like some," she said, voice soft. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone brought me something. Just because. Not for a holiday, not out of obligation, just kindness. The porch light flickered on above us. The chain of the swing creaked faintly as the breeze picked up. I smiled, small, grateful. "Thank you," I said. She called me sweetheart, just like she always had. Not in that condescending way some people do, but with warmth, like the word itself had a hug built into it, and I remembered. I remembered knocking on her door to borrow a cup of sugar, or ask if her son could walk mine. Home. I remembered her holding Ellie on her hip while I ran late to parent-teacher meetings. I remembered needing her and being welcomed. Now here she was, on my porch, still calling me sweetheart. It reminded me that I had been loved. Long before I felt forgotten. Long before this quiet filled the house, like dust in corners I'd stopped. Noticing. Behind us, the kitchen light glowed soft through the screen door. I sat beside her on the swing, the old wood groaning gently beneath us. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was the only one holding the silence. She reached across the space between us and placed her hand over mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy, just warm. "You deserve better," she said quietly. 3 words, just that. But something in the way she said it. It landed deeper than all the long conversations I'd been waiting for. All the apologies I hadn't gotten, all the texts that never came. It didn't explain everything. It didn't fix the emptiness. But it did something gentler. It reminded me that I wasn't invisible. Carol didn't look away. Her thumb rubbed, softly across my knuckles like a mother would, like a friend, like someone who saw me fully, even in the dark. Out in the hedges, the fireflies had started blinking. The sky had turned that in-between color, half blue, half night. I breathed in slowly, and for the first time all week, it didn't feel forced. Something inside me cracked open, not in a painful way, not sharp or shattering. It was more like when you finally open a jar that's been sealed too long, that small pop of air, the release of something that had been held too tightly. Her words didn't patch up what had been hurt, but they made space for the ache to stretch its legs, to breathe. I sat there, her hand still resting on mine, and let that shift settle in. It was like taking off shoes that had been too tight, too long. The candle on the railing flickered, casting our shadows against the wall. The stars were just beginning to show up overhead. I looked at her and whispered, "Thank you." She just smiled, gave my hand a gentle squeeze, and didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. When she left, I brought the peaches inside. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the little lamp above the sink. I could still smell the warmth of her visit, like her kindness had left a trace in the air alongside the scent of ripe fruit. I took the bowl Harold had carved back in '81, walnut, smooth as river stones, and gently placed the peaches inside. Then I kept one out, just one. I set it by the sink. I wanted to save it for the morning, not because I needed to stretch the gift, but because I wanted to taste it slowly, to remember that even after a day like today, something sweet could still come unasked, unrushed, freely given. The phone buzzed. On the armrest beside me, screen lighting up like it always did, too bright, too full of lives I no longer fit into. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. Another photo. A round of drinks, tan lines, big grins, those matching shirts they thought were clever. A beach sunset behind them, the kind you see on postcards, the kind they'd sent to everyone but me. I stared at it for just a second, then let the screen go dark. The hum of the fridge in the next room filled the silence. I could hear the neighbor's lawn sprinkler clicking through its lazy rhythm. I didn't need another reminder that I wasn't missed. I just sat there, letting the sunlight stretch across the floor toward my feet, warm and quiet. Sometimes, silence answers louder than any group chat ever could. The cemetery gate still squeaked the way it did that morning when we buried Harold. That slow iron groan that should have sounded spooky, but didn't. It was comforting. I pushed it open with one hand, and the metal felt warm from the sun. Familiar, like a place that knew how to hold grief without asking questions. Leaves crunched under my shoes as I walked, slow and steady. The path hadn't changed. Same cracks in the stone, same pine needles tucked into the corners. Even the air had that cool, earthy scent, like the woods just beyond the fence were still watching. I breathed in deep. Exhaled slower, like the air itself had been waiting for me to finally let something go. The oak trees had grown taller than I remembered. Branches stretched so high they tangled into the sky like arms in prayer. Harold loved them. We planted them together when this cemetery was just grass and silence. Back then, they looked like sticks with leaves. He said, "They'll outlive us, you know." And I laughed, like I didn't quite believe it. Now, I placed my hand against one trunk. It was wide, solid, the bark rough beneath my fingers. I leaned in just a little. "You'd like them now," I whispered. A bird rustled above, wings fluttering gently through the canopy. I closed my eyes and imagined him standing beside me, grinning like he always did when something grew just right. We may not have had forever, but we planted something that did. I sat down on the stone bench near his grave, let my hands rest on my knees, and just breathed for a moment. Then, without planning to, I said his name. Harold. Not loud, just enough, just once. It didn't echo, it settled, like warm tea on a sore throat, like the hush that falls in a room when someone finally tells the truth. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't need to. I brought my presence. And that's what he used to bring to me, too. Steady, warm, always enough. The breeze caught the edge of my cardigan and lifted it just a bit. I let it. Let the quiet fill the space between heartbeats, between memories. For the first time in days, I didn't feel lonely. I felt accompanied. I stayed there a little longer, watching the wind dance across the grass. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast everything in that soft gold light, the kind that makes even sorrow feel beautiful. I realized then, it wasn't their updates I missed. It was being seen, being remembered. The cemetery didn't lie. It didn't perform. It didn't pretend to be busy or forget birthdays or miss anniversaries because flights were cheap. It just was. Honest. Still. And it gave me something no call ever could. Room. To feel, to remember, to be. I stood slowly, brushed off my skirt, and walked back through the squeaky gate. My steps are the only sound on the gravel. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It waits for you in the silence and welcomes you home. The pen was already in my purse. Blue ink, smooth glide, the kind Harold used to keep near the checkbook. I tucked it in that morning not out of habit, but because I didn't want to hesitate. I already knew I wouldn't. It wasn't a decision born out of bitterness. I wasn't walking into that office fueled by anger or wrapped in grief. That part had passed. All the crying, the second-guessing, the pacing in the kitchen after everyone had gone to sleep. I'd done it. I'd lived it. This was something else. Kind of quiet certainty. The kind that settles in your bones when there's nothing left to debate. Just the next step waiting for you to take it. The receptionist smiled as she led me in, and I nodded back with the calm of someone who'd already made peace with others and with herself. Mr. Jensen looked at me over the rim of his glasses, eyes kind but curious. Like a tailor inspecting the edge of a hem, checking to see if it was final or if a thread might still be loose. "You're sure?" he asked, voice soft. I nodded. "Yes, I am." He didn't press, just leaned back slightly, hands folding together. "I've spent a lifetime giving what wasn't always seen. My time, my sleep, my joy, my Sundays, all the soft things you can't list out loud. I'd given, and I was never sorry. But this was mine to give differently. For once, I was going to give something that mattered to me, on my terms, and I didn't need permission." I clicked the pen open and took the first sheet. My hand didn't tremble. The pen moved across the page with the same steadiness I used when hemming Sunday dresses or tying bows on birthday gifts. I've always known how to finish things neatly, but this wasn't for appearance. This wasn't for anyone else's comfort. I signed with a quiet purpose, each line like a stitch in something only I understood. No fanfare, no trembling, just closure, done in cursive. Outside, I heard the distant rush of a passing car, the world still going about its business. But at that moment, at that desk, I felt still, whole. That house didn't deserve to be turned into a project. It has held our lives. Harold's music, my baking, Ellie's first steps, the sound of rain on the porch roof during our worst winter. There had been fights, yes, but also whispered apologies over shared coffee, bedtime songs, and the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting down the hallway at Christmas. It had absorbed all of it, every season. Every silence, And I couldn't let that be forgotten for the sake of open floor plans or a yoga studio. Harold used to say, "Libraries are sacred. They hold what people forget." So now, that house would hold stories, not just mine, but everyone's. A community place, a quiet place, a place for remembering. That was the only inheritance I wanted that house to give. I didn't cut them out of the will. I'm not cruel. I gave them the things no one could argue over. The photo albums, Harold's cufflinks, the quilt from my wedding trunk, the one my mother made with hands that ached every winter. But the house? The house was the heart of it all, and the heart doesn't split evenly. It needed to go where it could still speak, and so I left it at the library. So someone, someday, would walk through those halls and feel a kind of peace they didn't expect. That was enough for me. When the folder closed with a soft thump, I felt lighter. No applause, no tears. Just that gentle, sacred quiet that follows when something hard is done right. I stood, tucked the pen back in my purse, and gave Mr. Jensen a small smile. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "You did what was right." Outside, the sun had risen a little higher, casting longer shadows along the sidewalk. The office door clicked shut behind me, and in that quiet, something inside me untied. A ribbon, maybe. A knot. It didn't feel like being left behind. It felt like finally choosing myself and walking forward in peace. The door swung open like nothing had happened. They came in laughing, tan lines sharp against their sleeves, hair still holding the scent of salt and coconut. Shampoo. Suitcases rolled in behind them, one wheel squeaking across the tile. Flip-flops landed with a slap in the hallway rug. "God, it's good to be home," my daughter-in-law said, tossing her sun hat onto the entryway table. I stepped out from the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel, and smiled. Not big, just enough. Not one of them paused. Not one asked how my week had gone. My silence didn't slow them. It didn't even make a ripple. Their joy was loud, complete, full. And I stood there in the doorway, the golden hour casting soft light across the floor, and realized I'd been forgotten without malice. And somehow, that made it hurt even more. They headed straight to the fridge. "Ugh, I need water," my son said, pulling out a bottle and drinking half before the door even closed. The chatter picked back up. Snorkeling adventures, a dolphin sighting, the buffet that had crab legs every night. Laughter echoed off the cabinets as if they were trying to out-volume the week I'd spent in silence. I stood at the sink, rinsing out the glass vase that had held daisies before they wilted. The stems slipped between my fingers, soft and browned. At the edges. No one asked if I'd cooked. No one saw the melted candle stub still sitting on the dining table. No one noticed the roast that had filled the house with Harold's favorite smells, or the empty chairs I'd pulled out anyway. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they hadn't looked. It came later, after they'd unpacked and showered and thrown their sandy towels straight into the hallway hamper. My son leaned against the counter as I sliced bread for dinner. "So, how was your week, Mom?" I smiled. Not bitter. Just worn. Productive, I said. It was the truth. I had changed my will. I had changed something deeper. And they didn't know. They didn't need to. I buttered the bread, placed it on a tray, and slid it into the oven. They moved on quickly, debating whether to watch a movie or scroll TikTok. And I stood there, hands on the edge of the counter, realizing that the most important thing I'd done all week didn't need their witnessing. It just needed to be done. I reached for the mugs as the kettle began to hum. The good china, white with gold trim, the set I used on holidays and anniversaries, stayed right where it was, tucked away. Instead, I chose the ones with stories. Harold's chipped blue one, and mine from the garden club potluck. They didn't notice, and I didn't expect them to anymore. There was a time I'd have felt hurt by that, the invisibility of what I chose, the quiet rebellion in not reaching for the nice things, but now it felt like setting a soft boundary. I poured the tea. The mugs clinked on the granite. They kept talking. And I kept moving, steady in the choices I no longer needed them to validate. The kitchen was full. Their voices filled every corner. Jokes, tan lines, airport stories. I stirred the pot on the stove, nodding in all the right places. I asked, "The questions. How was the food? Did you get sunburned? How was the flight?" They answered, quick, animated. But inside me, there was stillness. A room they hadn't entered. A room they didn't know existed. It was where Harold still lived. Where the anniversary roast had sat untouched. Where they will now bore my new signature. And it was where I now kept the part of myself I no longer offered out like warm bread at a table that no longer noticed the effort. They didn't notice. The shift, not in the cabinet that stayed closed, not in the table missing its flowers, not in the way I carried myself through the evening, quiet, present, unshaken. They came back from palm trees and postcard views, but I had returned from something else entirely, from a place where I had stopped asking to be seen. From a choice I made not in anger, but in self-respect. Later, I sat with my tea on the porch. The porch light flickered overhead. China stayed untouched. The dining room vase remained empty. And I sat tall, not in defiance, but in quiet confirmation. They hadn't changed, but I had, and maybe they never would know. But I would always remember. The Sunday light fell across the carpet just like it used to. Soft and golden, stretching in from the windows like a warm hand on my shoulder. It reminded me of game nights, of Harold reading trivia questions too seriously and Ellie giggling over her own cheat sheets. The room hadn't changed much. Same faded floral rug, same smell of thyme and roast drifting in from the kitchen. But something inside me had shifted. I'd started the roast early, not out of tradition, but because keeping my hands busy helped me breathe. Low and slow, just the way Harold liked it. Every corner of the house felt familiar. Every dish in its place. The table set is like muscle memory, but today I wasn't just hosting dinner. Today, I was holding the cards, not to win, but to finally lay them down. They came in like it was any other Sunday. My son kissed my cheek and asked if the tea was sweetened. My daughter-in-law brought a lemon tart from the grocery store, still in the plastic clamshell. Ellie tossed her backpack on the sofa and grabbed a lemonade from the fridge. Light talk. Familiar patterns. No one noticed the envelope resting in my lap. That's the strange thing about routine. It can make you miss the moment everything quietly changes. I let them settle in. I let them believe it was just another evening. The roast rested on the counter. The candles flickered faintly. I listened to the clinking of ice and silverware and plates. Then I cleared my throat. Just once, and every fork stopped. I unfolded the letter slowly. The envelope made a soft rip, like paper. Remembering something too long held shut, my hand stayed steady. My voice, when I began, was low. Even. I want to speak to you for a moment, not as your mother, your grandmother, or your host, but as a woman who has lived. No one interrupted. I didn't read it like a list. I read it like a promise kept. The words came from a place deeper than pride, deeper than pain. I spoke of love, not the kind you post about or measure in phone calls, the kind you show, quietly, consistently. I didn't point fingers. I didn't raise my voice. I explained. Why would the house become a library? Why the will had been changed? What legacy means when no one's looking? And when I reached the last sentence, I folded the letter back with care, like laying something to rest. Of everyone in that room, it was Ellie who looked at me, really looked. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her eyes glistening just slightly. There was no shock in them. No outrage, just kind of quiet. Knowing. That look, soft and steady, felt like someone threading something back together inside me. I saw Harold in her at that moment, the patience, the gentleness. I'd spent the last few years wondering if anyone in this family still listened, with their hearts. And there she was. Breath caught like a held note. She saw me, all of me, and it was enough. My son didn't say a word. He didn't even lift his head, just stared at the rug beneath his shoes like it had done something wrong, and maybe it had. Maybe he remembered dropping crumbs there as a boy, laying on it sick with the flu, napping there after prom. Maybe he remembered all the meals I'd made, the advice I'd given, the way I used to sit up late just to be sure he made it home. Okay, and maybe, just maybe, he finally realized what all that love had cost. Not in dollars, but in pieces I gave without asking anything in return. The fan overhead turned slowly, stirring the air but not the silence. I didn't need him to speak. Some understanding lives in the weight of what's unsaid. No one reached. For their forks, the roast sat cooling in the kitchen, untouched. The tart remained in its box. Time felt suspended, like someone had pressed pause. The only sound was the breeze brushing through the open window, lifting the curtain slightly, like the house itself was sighing. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Let it be. Sometimes silence is the truth's final punctuation mark. It says, now you know. No need to argue. No need to explain. Just feel it. Let it settle. When I stood, my body ached, but not from age, from the weight of having carried so much for so long. I pushed the chair back gently, its legs scraping the wood floor like a farewell note. I walked slowly to the kitchen, not triumphant, just whole. The steam from the pot roast curled into the quiet behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I stood exactly where I was meant to be. And that was enough. I folded. Harold's old Afghan over my knees, easing back into the porch rocker as the sun began to dip behind the trees. The Afghan was thinner now, frayed in the corners, but it still held warmth, not just in its stitching, but in its memory. When I leaned forward, I caught the faintest trace of him. His aftershave, maybe. Woodsy, clean, something warm and gone. It didn't make me cry. It just made me still. There was a comfort in that kind of remembering, the kind that doesn't beg for attention. Harold never needed applause. His love showed up in packed lunches, fixed screen doors, and the way he'd pull the covers over my shoulder before bed. That scent, faint and fading, grounded me. Out in the garden, the lavender swayed gently with the breeze, brushing against the porch rail. The wood beneath the rocker creaked softly with each back and forth. It was early sunset, gold light spilling slowly, and I let it all wrap around me like a final kindness. The oaks cast long shadows across the grass, their limbs stretching wide and slow in the golden air. Harold and I planted them when this yard was mostly dirt and dandelions. We used coffee mugs for scoops, joking that the trees would drink better than we did. Now they stood tall, cathedral tall. The leaves rustled like whispers. Not questions, not interruptions, just presence. And in that hush, I felt heard, not with ears, but with heart. Those trees had seen everything. The summer barbecues, the birthday candles, the arguments no one else knew about. They watched me grow older, grow quiet, grow tired, and still, they stayed. I reached out and let my fingers brush the edge of a low-hanging branch. It didn't flinch. It didn't need to. It just listened. The tea had gone lukewarm in my cup, but I didn't mind. I wrapped my hands around it anyway, more for the weight than the heat. The wind chimes above me swayed gently, soft music without melody. Cicadas hummed like a distant lullaby, their rhythm steady and unchanged. This silence wasn't hollow. It wasn't the silence of waiting for a call that never came, or the quiet that follows being overlooked. This was different. This was a stillness I had chosen, earned, deserved. I sat with it like an old friend who didn't ask questions, who just sat beside you on the porch and let you breathe. I wasn't lonely. I was at peace. Maybe they'll understand. Not now, maybe not even soon. But someday they'll walk into the library that used to be our house. They'll run their hands across the banister Harold built. They'll see the piano and remember something small, a song, a lullaby, a moment they didn't know was still tucked inside them. They'll open the old cedar trunk, find the quilt, the photos, the handwriting on yellowed recipe cards, and something will click. Not all of it, not perfectly, but enough, because legacy doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be understood. It waits, quiet and patient, until the day it's needed. And when that day comes, I hope they feel it. Not in what they got, but in what they finally saw. Giving them the truth wasn't easy. It cost me something. Not anger, not distance, but a tenderness I had to set aside for a while, because love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's silent, sometimes it teaches by stepping away, by drawing lines, by saying, "This far, no further." Didn't leave the table angry. I left it to show them where I stood. And yes, that choice carved something out of me. But I've carried their weight for decades. Their mistakes. They forget. Their needs. Sometimes love means showing someone the weight of what they never had. To carry. And it means carrying yourself out of a room when it stops holding who you really are. The sun dipped low, touching everything in orange and rose. It painted the edges of the garden in colors no phone could capture, no filter could soften. I rocked slowly, the rhythm as old as breath, as old as sorrow. Each creak of the chair felt like a lullaby. I felt the ache in my knees, in my chest. But I didn't shrink from it. I sat with every bit of it, and I smiled, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to prove. Not to them, not to Harold. Not to the world, just to myself, and in that moment, bathed in light, wrapped in worn cotton, held by the breeze, I was enough. More than enough. And the sunset? It looked softer now, because so did I. Some endings don't need applause, just a quiet place to rest. If this story reminded you of someone you've loved, or something you've let go of, I'd be honored to hear it. And if you'd like to sit with me again, you're always welcome to subscribe.